The rain hammered down on Kieran Foster's tin roof like 1,000 desperate fists, but it was the small green hand tugging at his coat sleeve that made him look up from the harness he was mending. The orc girl could not have been more than 7 years old, her tusks barely visible beneath her trembling upper lip, her pointed ears flattened against her skull in a way that spoke of pure terror. Water streamed down her face, mixing with tears he pretended not to notice as she looked up at him with eyes too old for her small frame. "Sir," she said, her voice breaking on the single word, "my mother didn't come home." Kieran dropped the leather strap without thinking and grabbed his heavy wool coat from the peg by the door. The girl flinched when he moved, but he ignored it, shoving his arms through the sleeves and reaching for the oil lantern that hung beside his worn boots. Outside, the storm had turned the world into a nightmare of mud and darkness, the kind of weather that could kill a person if they wandered too far from shelter. The kind of weather that made even experienced hunters lose their way. "When did she leave?" he asked, keeping his voice steady as he lit the lantern with hands that had steadied 1,000 frightened animals but never a frightened child. "This morning, before the sun came up. She said she would be back before dark." The girl's words tumbled out in a rush, her accent thicker than the orcs who lived closer to human settlements. "She went to check the traps in the western woods. She always comes back before dark. Always." Kieran knew those woods. He had hunted them for the better part of 15 years, ever since he had left the war behind and bought this small homestead on the frontier, where humans and orcs existed in an uneasy truce that consisted mostly of ignoring each other's existence. The western woods were treacherous even in good weather, full of ravines hidden by undergrowth and old deadfalls that could snap a leg if you weren't careful. In weather like this, they would be a death trap. "What's your name?" he asked as he pulled on his boots, lacing them with the quick efficiency of a man who had dressed for battle more times than he cared to remember. "Kessa." She watched him with those two old eyes, her small hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Are you going to find her?" "I'm going to try." He stood and looked down at her, really looked at her, seeing the way her rough spun dress hung on her thin frame, the bare feet that were caked with mud, the desperate hope that warred with the certainty of disappointment in her expression. "Where do you live?" "The old shepherd's cottage." "Past the creek, where the big oak split by lightning stands." He knew it. The place had been abandoned for years before someone had moved in, and he had never bothered to check who. People on the frontier minded their own business, especially when it came to orcs. But looking at this small girl who had walked through a storm to find help from a human, he felt something crack open in his chest that he had thought the war had sealed shut forever. "You're going to stay here," he said firmly. "There's bread in the tin on the shelf and cheese in the cold box. The fire needs more wood. You know how to tend a fire." Kessa nodded, and he saw her shoulders straighten slightly, as if being given a task had given her something to hold on to. "Good. I'll be back with your mother." He said it like a promise, like an oath, and then he was out the door and into the storm before he could think too hard about what he was doing. The rain was cold enough to sting, driven horizontal by a wind that seemed determined to push him back toward the safety of his home. Kieran lowered his head and pushed forward, the lantern clutched in one hand and his walking stick in the other. He had strapped a coil of rope across his back and grabbed his medical kit without really thinking about it, the old soldier's instinct to be prepared for anything kicking in automatically. The western woods loomed ahead of him, a wall of darkness that even the lantern could barely penetrate. He knew the paths, though, knew them well enough to navigate by feel and memory. He started calling out as soon as he reached the tree line, his voice swallowed almost immediately by the storm. "Hello, can you hear me? I'm here to help." Nothing but the crash of rain and the groan of wind-bent branches answered him. He kept walking, kept calling, playing the lantern light across the ground and the surrounding trees. Orc trappers were skilled, careful people, but accidents happened. A trap could be sprung by the wrong animal, a person could slip on wet leaves, a branch could fall. He tried not to think about the darker possibilities as he pressed deeper into the woods. Time became meaningless in the darkness. He marked his progress by landmarks he could barely see, trusting to instinct and experience. The ravine where the deer came to drink. The old stone wall that marked some long-forgotten boundary. The massive fallen tree that had created a natural shelter beneath its upturned roots. It was at the fallen tree that he found her. She was wedged in the space beneath the roots, her leg bent at an angle that made his stomach clench even from a distance. The lantern light caught the green of her skin, the dark blood that stained the ground around her, the way her chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid breaths that spoke of pain and shock. She was alive, but for how much longer he could not say. "I'm here to help," he called out, moving closer slowly, keeping his movements obvious and non-threatening. "Your daughter sent me, Kessa. She's safe at my house." The orc woman's eyes snapped open, focusing on him with difficulty. She was younger than he had expected, perhaps in her late 20s, with the strong features and muscular build common to orc women. Her dark hair was plastered to her skull by the rain, and her lips were pale despite the natural gray-green of her skin. "Stay back," she managed, her voice rough with pain. "Don't need human help. Your daughter disagrees." Kieran set the lantern down carefully and shrugged off his coat, moving into the sheltered space beneath the roots. It was barely big enough for both of them, but it kept the worst of the rain off. "I'm going to look at your leg. If you want to take a swing at me afterward, that's your right, but I'm not leaving you here to die." She watched him with suspicion and pain warring in her dark eyes, but she did not try to stop him when he knelt beside her. Up close, he could see the extent of the damage. Her left leg was trapped beneath a section of the root system that had given way, probably when she had tried to take shelter from the storm. The leg was broken. That much was clear, and she had lost enough blood to make her skin clammy and her breathing rapid. "I need to move this root," he said, studying the tangle of wood and earth. "It's going to hurt. Everything hurts." She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again, fixing him with a stare that was equal parts defiant and desperate. "Why are you doing this?" "Because your daughter asked me to." He positioned himself to get the best leverage on the root, planting his feet carefully. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because I've seen enough people die and I'm tired of it. Take your pick." He put his back into it before she could respond, using his legs and the strength he had built up from years of farm work to lift the section of root, just enough for her to pull her leg free. She bit back a scream, the sound coming out as more of a growl, and then she was free and he was letting the root fall back with a crash that sent up a spray of mud and debris. "I need to set this before we move you," he said, already pulling bandages and splints from his kit. "I'm not going to lie to you. This is going to be the worst pain you've ever felt. I've birthed a child," she said through gritted teeth. "Try me." Her name was Mara, he learned, as he worked to straighten her leg and bind it between two sturdy branches he cut from the fallen tree. She was a trapper and a hunter, living alone with her daughter in the abandoned cottage, because her clan had cast her out when she refused to give up Kessa to the communal raising that was traditional among orcs. She told him this in short, clipped sentences punctuated by gasps of pain, and he got the sense that she was talking to distract herself from what he was doing to her leg. "Why did you refuse?" he asked, tying off the last bandage and checking his work with a critical eye. It would hold until he could get her to proper shelter, but she needed rest and time to heal. She's my daughter. Mine. I carried her, I birthed her, I nursed her. I wasn't going to hand her over to be raised by the clan elders like she was communal property. Mara's jaw was set in a stubborn line that reminded him forcibly of the little girl waiting back at his house. They said I was too influenced by human ways. Maybe I am, but she's still mine. Kieran nodded slowly, understanding more than she probably realized. He had seen what communal raising did to orc children in the war. It made them fierce and loyal to the clan, but it also made them hard, stripped of individual identity until they were more weapon than person. He could not blame any mother for wanting to spare her child that fate. "Can you walk?" he asked instead of voicing any of those thoughts. No. The admission cost her. He could see it in the way her hands clenched. "I can barely move without passing out." "Then I'm going to carry you." He stood and began fashioning a sling from the rope he had brought, working quickly but carefully. "It's about a mile back to my house. I can make it if you can hold on." "I don't want your help, human." But her voice lacked conviction, undercut by the way she was shivering despite being out of the direct rain. "You already have it." He finished the sling and positioned himself beside her. "Your other option is to stay here and hope the storm breaks before you bleed out or freeze to death. Somehow, I don't think that's what Kessa would want." The mention of her daughter's name did what his logic could not. Mara's resistance crumbled, and she allowed him to help her into the sling, biting back groans as the movement jostled her broken leg. He settled her weight against his back, adjusted the rope so it would not cut into either of them, and then he was standing with all of her solid, muscular weight pressing against him. The walk back was a nightmare. Each step sent jolts through both of them, and more than once he had to stop and brace himself against a tree when his legs threatened to give out. Mara did not complain, though he could feel the tension in her body and hear the way her breathing hitched with each jarring movement. She held on with a grip that spoke of determination and desperation in equal measure. By the time his house came into view, Kieran's vision had narrowed to a tunnel, and his legs were shaking with exhaustion. But the door was opening and Kessa was there, her small face lighting up with relief and joy so profound it hurt to see. "Mama," she cried, and then she was helping in the way small children do, getting underfoot and making things more complicated, but also giving him the extra burst of strength he needed to get Mara through the door and onto his bed. He lowered her as gently as he could, but she still gasped in pain when her leg touched the mattress. Kessa climbed up beside her immediately, pressing against her mother's side with a fierceness that spoke of how scared she had been. "I'm sorry," Mara murmured, her hand stroking her daughter's wet hair. "I'm sorry I scared you." "You came back," Kessa whispered. "You always come back." Kieran left them there and went to build up the fire, giving them privacy for their reunion while he tried to stop his hands from shaking. The adrenaline was wearing off now, leaving him aware of every pulled muscle and strained tendon. He was too old for heroics, he thought ruefully. 42 was too old to be hauling injured orc women through storms. But when he looked back and saw Kessa's small hand clutched in her mother's larger one, saw the gratitude and relief and lingering fear on both their faces, he knew he would do it again in a heartbeat. The storm continued through the night, rattling the shutters and making sleep impossible, even if Kieran had been inclined to take his bed back from his unexpected guests. Instead, he set up a pallet near the fire and dozed in fits and starts, waking every hour or so to check on Mara and make sure her fever was not rising. Infection was the real danger now, more than the broken bone. If the wound in her leg turned septic, all his efforts would be for nothing. By morning, the rain had gentled to a steady drizzle, and Mara's fever had broken. Kessa had fallen asleep curled against her mother's side, her small body relaxed in a way that spoke of bone-deep exhaustion finally being allowed to claim her. Kieran made breakfast quietly, porridge with honey and dried apples, and was rewarded when Mara's eyes opened and tracked his movements with wary awareness. "How's the pain?" he asked, keeping his voice low so as not to wake Kessa. "Bad." She did not try to hide it, which he appreciated. "But I've had worse. I need to check the wound, make sure it's clean." He brought over his medical kit and a basin of warm water, setting them on the floor beside the bed. "I'll be as gentle as I can." She nodded, her jaw tight, and carefully extracted herself from Kessa's grip without waking her daughter. Kieran unwrapped the bandages slowly, watching her face for signs of excessive pain. When he finally revealed the wound, he was relieved to see that the flesh around it was pink and healthy-looking rather than the angry red or ominous darkening that would signal infection. "You're lucky," he said, cleaning the wound with steady hands. "No sign of rot. If you stay off it and let it heal properly, you should walk again without a limp." "How long?" Mara's voice was flat, but he heard the worry beneath it. 6 weeks, maybe 8. He began wrapping fresh bandages, his movements practiced. "You'll need to stay somewhere you can rest and keep it elevated. Putting weight on it too soon could make it heal wrong. I have a daughter to feed. I have traps to check and a garden to tend and firewood to split." Each word was clipped, frustrated. "I don't have 6 weeks to lie in a bed." "You do if you want to walk again." Kieran tied off the bandage and sat back on his heels, meeting her eyes. "And before you say you'll manage, think about what happens if that leg heals crooked. You won't be able to hunt. You won't be able to trap. You'll be lucky if you can walk without a cane." "Is your pride worth crippling yourself?" Mara glared at him, her tusks visible as her lips pulled back in a snarl. But she did not argue because they both knew he was right. "We have nowhere to go," she said finally. "My clan won't take me back. I have no family who will help. The cottage is ours because no one else wanted it, but I can't pay rent or tribute if I can't work." Kieran had known this conversation was coming from the moment he had lifted that root off her leg. He had known it, and yet he still found himself saying the words that would change everything. "Stay here, both of you, until you're healed and back on your feet." Mara's eyes widened, genuine shock replacing the wariness for a moment. "You would let orcs stay in your home, a human like you." "A human like me is just a man who has more space than he needs and a conscience that won't let him throw an injured woman and her child out into the cold." He stood, his knees cracking in a way that made him feel every one of his 42 years. "You can take the bed. I'll sleep by the fire. Kessa can help with small chores to earn your keep if it makes you feel better about accepting charity. But you're staying until you can walk." He did not wait for her to accept or refuse, just walked away to give her time to think. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the world washed clean and smelling of wet earth. His small farm looked bedraggled but intact, the chickens already out scratching in the mud, the goats bleeding from their shelter. Life went on, storm or no storm. Behind him, he heard Kessa's sleepy voice asking questions and Mara's low responses. He did not try to make out the words, just stood in his doorway and wondered what he had just gotten himself into. The answer, he would learn over the following days, was complicated. Mara was a difficult patient, stubborn and proud and deeply uncomfortable with accepting help. She tried to get up and move around far too early, insisting she was fine even as pain turned her skin pale and made her hands shake. Kieran had to physically block her path more than once, using his size and the firmness he had learned commanding soldiers to make her sit back down. "You're worse than a mule," he told her on the 3rd day, when he caught her trying to hobble to the outhouse on her own. More stubborn and half as smart. I don't need help using the privy, she shot back, her eyes flashing with anger and humiliation. You do if you want to get there without falling on your face and undoing all the healing you've managed so far. He offered his arm, keeping his expression neutral even though he could see how much it cost her to accept. Swallow your pride for 5 minutes, it won't kill you. It might, she muttered, but she took his arm and they made the slow journey together. Kessa, on the other hand, was an easy house guest. She was quiet and watchful, moving through Kieran's home like a small shadow, always trying to help and never getting in the way. She gathered eggs from the chickens without being asked, stacked firewood with careful precision, and swept the floor with a thoroughness that suggested she had been doing such chores since she was old enough to hold a broom. Kieran found himself looking for excuses to make her smile. He carved her a small wooden bird one evening, working by firelight while Mara dozed and Kessa watched with wide eyes. When he handed it to her, she clutched it to her chest like it was made of gold, and the shy smile she gave him felt like a victory. What do you say? Mara prompted from the bed, her eyes open and watching them. Thank you, sir, Kessa whispered. Kieran, he corrected gently. You can call me Kieran, sir makes me feel old. You are old, Mara said, but there was the faintest hint of amusement in her voice. And you're a terrible patient. Seems we're both burdened with unfortunate truths. He grinned when she snorted, something in his chest warming at the small sound. The days developed a rhythm. Kieran would wake early and tend to his animals while Kessa helped her mother with her morning routine. They would eat breakfast together, simple fare but filling, and then Kieran would check Mara's wound and change the bandages while Kessa made herself scarce. The rest of the day would be spent in separate tasks that slowly began to overlap. Mara would give advice on the best way to prepare the rabbit Kieran caught, or tell him which plants in the forest could be used for medicine. Kessa would follow him around the farm, asking endless questions about the animals and the crops, and why humans built their houses differently than orcs did. In the evenings, they would gather around the fire, and slowly, carefully, they would talk. Kieran learned that Mara had been a warrior before she became a mother, fighting in the same wars he had fought on the opposite side. They compared scars one night, his from an orc blade across his ribs, hers from a human arrow in her shoulder. They had been enemies once, trying to kill people just like each other, and now they were sharing a roof and stories. I hated humans, Mara admitted one night, her voice soft enough that Kessa would not hear from where she slept in the bed. I thought you were all cruel and greedy, stealing land that wasn't yours and calling us monsters for defending it. We did steal the land, Kieran said quietly. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. The war was about expansion and resources, not defense, no matter what the king's proclamation said. I saw what we did to orc villages. I saw the bodies of children. That's why I left. Mara looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. You left because of that, not because you were injured or discharged. I left because I couldn't stomach being part of it anymore. He poked at the fire, watching sparks spiral up toward the chimney. I walked away in the middle of the night, deserted my post, and came out here where no one knew me. Bought this land from a widow who wanted to move back east to be with her daughter. I've been here ever since, trying to forget what I did in the name of king and country. Do you forget? No. He met her eyes, seeing understanding there. Do you? No. She was quiet for a moment, then added, but being here helps. Being away from the clan, away from the fighting, raising Kessa in peace, that helps. Then we're both trying to build something different than what we came from. He stood and banked the fire for the night. Maybe that's enough common ground to build on. He did not see the way she watched him as he settled onto his pallet, her expression thoughtful and uncertain in equal measure. By the end of the second week, Mara was able to sit up without going pale, and the wound had healed enough that Kieran felt comfortable reducing the frequency of bandage changes. Kessa had started to laugh more, the sound bright and unexpected, usually prompted by something Kieran did or said. He found himself playing the fool just to hear it, making exaggerated faces when he thought Mara was not looking, or telling terrible jokes that only a 7-year-old would find funny. "You're good with her," Mara said one afternoon, watching him teach Kessa how to whistle using a blade of grass. "Do you have children of your own?" "No, never married, never had the chance." He demonstrated the technique again, pleased when Kessa managed a faint whistle. "The war took up most of my youth, and after I left, I didn't feel like I had any right to inflict myself on someone else. Too much blood on my hands. That's foolish." Mara's voice was firm. "You left because you saw the blood and refused to spill more. That takes more courage than staying and following orders." "Maybe." He looked up and found her watching him with an intensity that made something flutter in his chest. "Or maybe I was just a coward who couldn't face what I'd become." "You're not a coward. A coward wouldn't have gone into a storm to save an orc woman he'd never met." She held his gaze, and he could not look away. "A coward wouldn't share his home and his food with people everyone else considers monsters." "I don't think you're monsters," he said quietly. "I never did, even when I was supposed to. You're just people trying to survive, same as everyone else." Kessa chose that moment to produce a proper whistle, loud and shrill, breaking the tension. They both laughed, and the moment passed, but Kieran felt it settle somewhere in his chest, warm and dangerous. He was falling for her. He recognized the signs, even though it had been years since he had felt them. The way his eyes sought her out whenever she was in the room. The way her laugh made something in him relax. The way he found excuses to be near her, to talk to her, to see her smile. It was foolish and dangerous and completely impossible, but it was happening anyway. Mara was orc and he was human. Their peoples had been at war for decades. Even now, in peacetime, the prejudice ran deep on both sides. Humans saw orcs as savage beasts, barely better than animals. Orcs saw humans as weak and treacherous, not to be trusted. A relationship between them would be scorned by everyone, accepted by no one. And yet, watching her show Kessa how to braid her hair one morning, her strong fingers gentle and patient, he could not make himself care about any of that. The third week brought the first real test of their fragile domestic peace. Kieran had to go into the nearby town to sell eggs and buy supplies, a trip he made every few weeks. He debated leaving Mara and Kessa alone, worried about what would happen if someone from town decided to investigate his homestead while he was gone, but Mara insisted she would be fine. "We'll stay inside and keep quiet," she promised. "No one will even know we're here." He left at dawn, driving his small cart down the rutted road that led to the town of Miller's Ford. It was a shabby frontier settlement, more a collection of buildings than a proper town, but it had a general store and a market square where farmers could sell their goods. He did his business quickly and efficiently, trading eggs for flour and salt, and a small bag of peppermint candies that he told himself were for Kessa, but knew were really just an excuse to see her smile. He was loading the last of his purchases when a voice stopped him cold. "Kieran Foster. Didn't expect to see you in town." He turned to find Marcus Finch standing behind him, a man he recognized from his army days. Marcus had been a sergeant in another company, known for his cruelty to orc prisoners and his enthusiasm for burning villages. Kieran had avoided him whenever possible during the war and had hoped never to see him again. "Marcus." He kept his voice neutral, turning back to his cart. "I live near here. I come to town regular enough." So I've heard. Bought yourself a nice little farm, settled down into peaceful retirement. Marcus moved closer, his eyes sharp and assessing. Must be lonely out there all by yourself. I like the quiet. Kieran tied down his supplies, keeping his movements calm and unhurried even as tension crawled up his spine. If you'll excuse me, I need to get back. Heard some interesting rumors lately. Marcus leaned against the cart, making it clear he was not going to let Kieran leave easily. Talk of orc sightings in the area, a woman and a child living rough in the woods. Some folks are thinking about organizing a hunting party, clearing out the monsters before they cause trouble. Kieran's blood ran cold, but he kept his expression blank. Orcs have as much right to the frontier as anyone else, long as they're not causing problems. That's treaty law. Treaty law. Marcus spat on the ground. Like orcs care about law, they're animals, Foster. You of all people should know that, after what you saw in the war. What I saw in the war was people on both sides doing terrible things to each other. Kieran met Marcus's eyes steadily. And I saw enough of it to last a lifetime. I'm done with fighting. Some fights you don't get to walk away from. Marcus pushed off from the cart, his hand resting on the knife at his belt in a gesture that was not quite a threat, but not quite innocent either. If you see any orcs around your property, you'll do the right thing and report them, won't you? For the safety of the community. I'll do what I think is right. Kieran climbed onto his cart, gathering the reins. That's all any man can do. He drove away, feeling Marcus's eyes on his back, and his hands did not stop shaking until he was well out of sight of the town. The ride home felt 3 times longer than usual, plagued by visions of what he might find when he got there. Had Marcus somehow already known about Mara and Kessa? Had he been fishing for information, or had that been a genuine warning? Either way, the threat was clear. If people in town learned he was harboring orcs, there would be trouble. He found his homestead exactly as he had left it, peaceful and undisturbed in the afternoon sun. Mara was sitting outside on the bench he had built near the door, her splinted leg propped up on a stool, her face turned toward the sun. She looked almost content, and something in his chest eased at the sight. "Any problems?" he asked as he climbed down from the cart. "None." Kessa found a nest of baby rabbits in the garden. She's been watching them all afternoon. Mara's eyes tracked his movements as he began unloading supplies. "You look worried. What happened in town?" He considered lying, then discarded the idea. She deserved to know what they were facing. "Ran into someone from my army days. He mentioned rumors about orcs in the area, talk of hunting parties." Mara went very still, her relaxed posture replaced by rigid tension. "We need to leave. Your leg is barely half healed. You can't walk, let alone travel through the wilderness." He carried a sack of flour inside, speaking over his shoulder. "And even if you could, where would you go? You said your clan won't take you back. Somewhere. Anywhere but here." She struggled to her feet, ignoring the way her face went pale with pain. "I won't put you in danger, Kieran. You've done enough for us. More than enough. Sit down before you fall down." He came back out and gently pushed her back onto the bench, his hands on her shoulders. "I'm not kicking you out, and you're not running off half-healed to die in the woods. We'll figure this out." "How?" Her eyes were fierce, afraid. "You can't fight the whole town. And even if you could, word would spread. More humans would come. They always do when they think there are orcs to kill. Then we'll be careful. Keep you out of sight when anyone comes around. I'll make excuses if I need to." He crouched in front of her, making her meet his eyes. "You're safe here, Mara, both of you. I'm not going to let anyone hurt you." "Why?" The question burst out of her, raw and confused. "Why are you doing this? We're nothing to you, just orcs who showed up on your doorstep." "You don't owe us anything." "Maybe I don't." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. Her fingers were rough and calloused, strong enough to snap bones, but they trembled slightly in his. "But I want to help. I want you to stay. Is that enough of a reason?" She stared at him, her breathing uneven, and he saw the moment something shifted in her eyes. Fear and suspicion giving way to something warmer, more dangerous. "Kieran! Mama, come look!" Kessa's voice shattered the moment as she came running around the corner of the house, her hands cupped carefully around something small and fuzzy. "One of the baby rabbits came right up to me." Kieran stood and stepped back, giving Mara space to breathe as Kessa showed off her discovery. But when he looked up, he found Mara watching him with an expression that made his heart beat faster, and he knew that something between them had changed irrevocably. The days after that were charged with a tension that had nothing to do with the threat from town, and everything to do with the way they could not seem to stop looking at each other. Kieran caught himself watching Mara as she worked on a piece of mending, her strong hands surprisingly deft with a needle. Mara's eyes followed him as he moved around the farm, and more than once he turned to find her gaze on him, thoughtful and uncertain. They did not talk about it. There was too much at stake, too many reasons it could never work. But the awareness hung between them like a living thing, growing stronger with each passing day. Kessa, with the perceptiveness of children, noticed something was different. "Why do you and Mama keep looking at each other weird?" She asked Kieran one afternoon when they were feeding the chickens together. "Weird how?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "Like you're trying to figure something out, but you don't want anyone to know you're thinking about it." She scattered grain with both hands, watching the chickens scramble for it. "My friend Tasha's mama used to look at her papa that way before they got married." Kieran nearly dropped the feed bucket. That's different." "Why?" "Because you're human and we're orcs." Kessa looked up at him with those two old eyes. "Mama says people are people, no matter what color their skin is or whether they have tusks. She says judging someone for how they look instead of how they act is stupid. Your mama is a wise woman." He resumed scattering grain, his mind racing. "But sometimes things are more complicated than they should be. Sometimes there are rules and expectations that make things difficult. Rules are stupid if they keep good people apart." Kessa said it with the absolute certainty of a child who had not yet learned that the world did not bend to wishes and wants. "You're good to us. That's what matters." If only it were that simple, Kieran thought. But he smiled at Kessa and did not argue, because in her world, it could be that simple, and he did not want to be the one to teach her otherwise. That night, after Kessa had fallen asleep, Kieran and Mara sat by the fire in a silence that felt heavier than usual. He was acutely aware of her beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her, smell the herbal soap she used. His hands itched with the desire to touch her, and he had to curl them into fists to keep them still. "Kessa said something today," Mara said suddenly, breaking the silence. "About me looking at you the way her friend's mother looked at her father before they got married." Kieran's breath caught. "She said something similar to me. Children see things adults try to hide." Mara was staring into the fire, her profile illuminated by the dancing light. "She's not wrong, is she, about the way I look at you?" "No." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "She's not wrong about how I look at you either." The admission hung between them, honest and terrifying. Mara turned to face him, and in her eyes he saw his own want and fear reflected back at him. "This is foolish," she said, but she did not look away. "We barely know each other. We were enemies once. You're human and I'm orc, and the whole world would condemn us for even thinking about this." "I know." He shifted closer, drawn by something stronger than sense or caution. "Doesn't change how I feel." "How do you feel?" Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, her eyes searching his face. "Like I've been walking through darkness for years, and you're the first real light I've seen." He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and cupped her face in his hand. Her skin was warm, the texture different from human skin but no less beautiful. Like I want to keep you safe and make you laugh and wake up every morning knowing you're here. Like I'm falling in love with you and I don't want to stop. Mara's breath hitched, and then she was closing the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that was tentative and fierce all at once. Kieran's hand slid into her hair, the other coming up to her waist, pulling her closer as the kiss deepened. She tasted like the peppermint tea she had drunk after dinner, and she kissed like a warrior, claiming territory and yielding none. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Mara rested her forehead against his. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered, "and it terrifies me too." He stroked his thumb along her cheekbone, marveling at the softness of her skin. "But I don't want to stop. I don't want to lose you, just because it's difficult. We'll lose more than each other if this goes wrong." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "If word gets out that you're involved with an orc, you'll lose your farm, your place in the community, maybe your life. And if my people find out I've taken up with a human, Kessa, and I will never be safe among orcs again. We'll be hunted by both sides. Then we'll be careful." He took both her hands in his, holding tight. "We'll keep this between us until we can figure out a better solution. But I'm not giving you up, Mara, not without a fight." She searched his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Not without a fight," she agreed and kissed him again, softer this time, a promise rather than a claim. They talked long into the night, sitting close together by the dying fire, mapping out a future that seemed impossible but that they both desperately wanted. They would be careful, discreet. When Mara was healed enough to travel, they would decide together where to go, what to do. Maybe there were places on the frontier where humans and orcs lived in closer harmony. Maybe they could build a new life somewhere no one knew them, where they could just be two people who loved each other instead of representatives of enemy species. It was a dream, fragile and uncertain, but it was theirs, and they held onto it with both hands. The next few weeks passed in a haze of stolen moments and careful secrecy. They did not let Kessa see them kiss or hold hands, not wanting to burden her with a secret she might accidentally reveal. But they found other ways to be close. Kieran would sit beside Mara when he checked her wound, his hands lingering a moment longer than necessary on her skin. Mara would brush her fingers through his hair when she passed him, the gesture quick but tender. At night, after Kessa was asleep, they would sit close by the fire and talk in whispers, sharing stories from their pasts and dreams for their futures. Mara's leg healed slowly but steadily. By the 5th week, she could put weight on it without going pale, and by the 6th, she was walking around the house with only a slight limp. Kieran knew he should be pleased by her progress, but each step she took toward recovery felt like a step toward a decision he was not ready to make. Once she was fully healed, there would be no more excuses to keep her here. She and Kessa would have to leave, for their own safety as much as anything else, unless he could find a way to make them stay permanently. The idea came to him one morning as he was mucking out the goat pen, sweaty and covered in dirt, but with his mind clear in the way physical labor always made it. He could marry her. It was legal, technically, under the treaty laws that governed the frontier. Human-orc marriages were rare to the point of being nearly unheard of, but they were not forbidden. If they were married, she and Kessa would have legal protection as his family. It would not stop the prejudice, but it would make it harder for anyone to try to drive them away. Of course, the same marriage would make him a pariah among humans and her a traitor among orcs. It would put all three of them in danger. But it would also make them a family, legally and officially, and that mattered more than anything else. He spent 3 days thinking it over, examining the idea from every angle, looking for flaws in the logic. Then he spent another 2 days carving a ring from a piece of oak, working in the barn when Mara and Kessa were occupied elsewhere, trying to get it just right. It was simple, unadorned, but he had smoothed and polished it until the wood gleamed like amber, and he had carved their initials inside where only they would see. On the first clear evening after a week of intermittent rain, he asked Mara to walk with him, leaving Kessa contentedly playing with the wooden animals he had carved for her. They walked down to the creek that marked the edge of his property, the water running high and fast from the recent rains. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, and Kieran thought there could not be a more beautiful backdrop for what he was about to do. "Your leg is healing well," he said, trying to find the right words. "Another week or two and you'll be able to travel without pain." "I know." Mara's voice was quiet, sad. "I've been thinking about where to go. There's a settlement 3 days east of here, near the border with the high orc territories. They say it's more tolerant of mixed communities. Kessa and I could try there. You could." He stopped walking and turned to face her, taking her hands in his. "Or you could stay here. Kieran, we've talked about this. It's not safe. It would be safer if you were my wife." He said it quickly, before he could lose his nerve, and watched her eyes go wide with shock. "Marry me, Mara. Make this official. Give me the legal right to protect you and Kessa. I know it won't solve everything. I know people will still talk and there will still be dangers, but at least we'll face them together as a family. You want to marry me?" She said it like she could not quite believe the words. "You want to tie yourself to an orc woman and her half-grown child, make yourself a target for every human who thinks cross-species relationships are an abomination." "Yes." He pulled the ring from his pocket, holding it up between them. "I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to teach Kessa how to read and write and watch her grow up. I want to build a life with you here or anywhere else you want to go. I love you, Mara. Will you marry me?" Mara stared at the ring, then at him, her eyes bright with tears. "This is insane," she whispered. "Completely insane. We'll have everyone against us." "Is that a no?" "No," she laughed, the sound broken and joyful all at once. "It's a yes. Yes, I'll marry you, you foolish, wonderful man. Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, the dark wood stark against her green skin. Then he was pulling her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and relief and joy surging through him. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her strong arms wrapping around him, holding him as tightly as he held her. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, Mara looked down at the ring on her finger with an expression of wonder. "How are we going to tell Kessa? Together?" He laced his fingers through hers, marveling at how right it felt. "We'll figure everything out together from now on." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and when they told Kessa that Kieran was going to be her father and they were all going to be a family, the little girl's shout of joy could probably be heard all the way in town. The wedding itself was a quiet affair, performed by a traveling magistrate who asked no questions and accepted Kieran's payment with a knowing look that said he had seen stranger things on the frontier. They spoke their vows in Kieran's small parlor with Kessa as their only witness, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they both lived. Mara wore a simple dress Kieran had bought for her in town, forest green to match her eyes, and Kieran wore his best shirt and the nervous expression of a man who could not quite believe his good fortune. When the magistrate pronounced them married and Kieran kissed his new wife, Kessa cheered so loudly that she startled the chickens outside, and Kieran thought his heart might burst from happiness. The trouble they had been expecting came 2 weeks later, in the form of Marcus Finch and 5 other men from town showing up at Kieran's farm, unannounced. Kieran saw them coming from where he was working in the garden and had just enough time to tell Mara to take Kessa inside and stay quiet before they rode into his yard. Foster. Marcus dismounted, his hand resting on the sword at his hip. We need to talk. Then talk. Kieran stood his ground, acutely aware of Mara and Kessa hidden in the house behind him. What brings you all the way out here? Had some reports of orc sightings on your property. Thought we'd come check it out, make sure you're not having any trouble. Marcus's eyes swept over the farm, assessing. Mind if we take a look around? I do, actually. Kieran kept his voice level calm. This is my land, legally purchased and registered. You have no authority to search it without cause. Reports of dangerous orcs seems like cause to me. One of the other men spoke up, a farmer Kieran recognized from market days. We're just looking out for the community, Foster, making sure everyone stays safe. The only thing on my property is my family and my livestock. Kieran stood a little straighter, letting his old military bearings show through. And my family is none of your concern. Your family, Marcus's eyes narrowed. You saying you've got people living with you now, I'm saying that what happens on my land is my business. Kieran crossed his arms, making it clear he was not going to budge. Unless you've got a warrant signed by a magistrate, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. The tension stretched out. 6 men on horseback facing one man standing alone, and Kieran knew that if they decided to push the issue, there was nothing he could do to stop them. But he also knew that Marcus and his friends were bullies, used to people backing down from confrontation. If he stood firm, there was a chance they would back off rather than escalate to actual violence. The standoff broke when the door to the house opened and Mara stepped out, Kessa tucked behind her. She was limping slightly, favoring her healing leg, but she held herself straight and proud. The green of her skin was unmistakable in the afternoon sun, as were the small tusks visible when she spoke. These men bothering you, husband, she said, pitching her voice to Carrie. The reaction was immediate. The farmer's horses shied, unsettled by the presence of an orc. Marcus's hand tightened on his sword hilt, and Kieran saw murder flash in his eyes before the man got himself under control. Husband, Marcus's voice was dangerously quiet. You married an orc. I married Mara, who happens to be orc. Kieran moved to stand beside his wife, taking her hand in his. And Kessa is my daughter now. We're a family, legally recognized under treaty law. You have a problem with that, you can take it up with the magistrate. You're a disgrace. The farmer who had spoken before spat the words like a curse. Lying with monsters, calling them family. You make me sick. Lucky for me, your opinion of my marriage isn't required. Kieran kept his tone light, but his grip on Mara's hand tightened. Now, I've asked you politely to leave. Don't make me ask again. Marcus stared at them for a long moment, his expression twisted with disgust and something that might have been hatred. Then he jerked his horse's head around and spurred it into a trot, the other men following close behind. But as they rode out of the yard, he turned back and called out a warning. You've made your choice, Foster. Don't expect any help from town when your orc friends turn on you, and don't think this is over. They rode away in a cloud of dust, leaving Kieran and Mara standing together in the yard. Kieran felt Mara trembling and pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. I'm sorry, she whispered against his chest. I shouldn't have come out. I just couldn't stand hiding while you faced them alone. Don't apologize. He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair. You did the right thing. They would have searched the house if we hadn't shown them there was nothing to hide. And now they know we're married, which means they can't touch you or Kessa without going through proper legal channels. Will that stop them? Kessa asked quietly, peeking out from behind her mother. It should. Kieran crouched down to her level, trying to project a confidence he did not entirely feel. The law is on our side, even if people's prejudices aren't. We just have to be smart and careful. But that night, lying in bed with Mara curled against his side, he stared at the ceiling and wondered if being smart and careful would be enough. Marcus had been a brutal soldier and was apparently an equally brutal citizen. He would not let this go, not easily. The question was what form his retaliation would take, and how prepared Kieran could be when it came. The answer came a week later, when Kieran woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of Mara screaming his name. He bolted out of bed to find the barn engulfed in flames, fire licking up the sides and threatening to spread to the house. His animals were inside, bleeding and crying in terror, and he did not think, just ran. Mara caught him at the door, her strength enough to hold him back even though he fought her. "You can't go in there. The whole structure is about to collapse. The goats, the chickens, I have to get them out." He struggled against her grip, desperate and furious. "I'll get them." She shoved him toward Kessa, who was standing frozen with fear in her nightdress. "Keep Kessa safe. I can move faster than you." Before he could argue, she was gone, running into the burning barn with the kind of fearless courage that took his breath away. Kieran pulled Kessa into his arms, holding her tight as they watched Mara emerge moments later with 2 terrified goats, then go back in for the chickens, carrying them out in their coop, even as smoke poured from the barn's entrance. She made 3 trips, saving every animal she could reach, but on the 4th trip, there was a groaning crack and part of the roof caved in. Kieran's heart stopped, but then Mara was staggering out, coughing and covered in soot but alive, and he could breathe again. They stood together in the yard and watched the barn burn to the ground, the flames painting the night sky orange. There was nothing they could do to save it. The fire was too hot, too advanced. All they could do was make sure it did not spread to the house or the other outbuildings. By the time dawn came, the barn was nothing but charred timbers and ash, and they were all exhausted and filthy with soot. The animals were traumatized but alive, huddled together in the chicken coop that Mara had dragged far from the fire. And burned into the dirt near where the barn had stood, Kieran found the message Marcus had left for them. "Monster lover," it read, the letters crude and hateful. Kieran stared at those words and felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. This was not going to stop. Marcus and people like him would not accept Kieran's marriage, would not leave them in peace. They would keep coming, keep threatening until they drove Mara and Kessa away or worse. "We should leave," Mara said quietly, reading his thoughts. "Go somewhere far from here where no one knows us." "No." Kieran turned to face her, his jaw set. "This is our home. I won't let them drive us out." "Kieran, it's not worth dying for. It's just a farm." "It's not just a farm. It's our home, the place where we're building our life together. If we run now, we'll always be running. There will always be people like Marcus in every town and settlement. We have to make a stand somewhere. It might as well be here." Mara looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then we fight, but we do it smart. We prepare, we protect ourselves, and we don't give them any excuse to come after us legally." "Agreed." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close despite the soot that covered them both. "We'll make this work, whatever it takes." Over the following weeks, they turned the farm into a fortress. Kieran built a new barn, smaller than the old one but sturdy, and positioned it where he could see it clearly from the house windows. He taught Mara how to shoot with the old hunting rifle he kept, and she taught him some of the defensive techniques orc warriors used. They established a watch schedule, making sure someone was always alert for any signs of trouble. They stockpiled food and supplies, prepared for the possibility that they might be cut off from town. And slowly, carefully, They reached out to others who might be sympathetic to their cause. There were more people on the frontier who had left traditional society behind than Kieran had realized. A widow who had been shunned for defending orc refugees. A half-orc blacksmith who made weapons for anyone who could pay, regardless of species. A human farmer married to an orc woman, living in secret 20 miles to the north. One by one, they built a small network of allies, people who believed that humans and orcs could coexist, could even love each other if given the chance. It was not much, but it was something. And when Marcus and his friends tried to burn their fields a month later, it was enough. The half-orc blacksmith had made them an alarm system, bells that could be rung to call for help. When the bells sounded in the middle of the night, 6 people showed up within the hour, ready to help fight the fire and defend the farm. Marcus and his people fled when they realized Kieran was not alone, and they did not come back. The message was clear. Kieran Foster and his family were not helpless, not isolated. They had friends and allies, and an attack on them would not go unanswered. After that, the harassment slowed and then stopped. Oh, there were still hateful looks when Kieran went to town, and whispered comments that were meant to reach his ears. But there was no more violence, no more direct threats. It seemed that Marcus had decided Kieran and his family were more trouble than they were worth. The seasons turned. Summer faded into autumn, and autumn into winter. The farm prospered despite the setbacks, the new barn filled with healthy animals and good hay. Kessa started learning to read from books Kieran bought in town, sitting at the kitchen table and sounding out words with patient determination. Mara's leg healed completely, the limp fading until it was barely noticeable, and Kieran fell more in love with his wife every single day. He loved the way she hummed while she cooked, the way she laughed at his terrible jokes, the way she held him at night like he was something precious. He loved watching her teach Kessa how to track animals in the snow, her voice patient and proud. He loved that she was strong enough to challenge him when he was being stubborn, and soft enough to comfort him when old war memories made sleep impossible. They were happy. Despite everything working against them, despite the prejudice and the threats and the constant awareness that they were living a life most people would condemn, they were happy. Winter brought snow that buried the farm in white silence, and with it came an unexpected visitor. Kieran was chopping wood when he saw the figure approaching through the snow, moving with the distinctive gait of an orc warrior. He called for Mara, and they stood together watching as the visitor came closer and revealed herself to be an older orc woman, her face marked with the ritual scars of a clan elder. "Mara, daughter of the Red Rock clan," the woman said without preamble. "I am Shara, elder of the council you once defied. I have come to speak with you." Mara's hand found Kieran's, gripping tight. "I have nothing to say to the council. They made their judgment clear when they cast me out. The council was wrong." Shara's words fell into the cold air like stones. "I've come to acknowledge that truth and to offer you a choice." "What kind of choice?" Mara's voice was wary, and Kieran could not blame her. He had learned enough about orc politics to know that their offers often came with strings attached. The world is changing. More orcs and humans are choosing to live together, to build families across the old battle lines. The council can either adapt or become irrelevant. Shara looked between Mara and Kieran, her expression unreadable. "We want to adapt. We want to welcome back those we cast out for choosing love over tradition. You could come home, Mara. You and your daughter and your human husband. We would accept you, protect you, give Kessa the chance to know her clan." Mara was silent for a long moment, and Kieran could feel the war happening inside her. The chance to go home, to be accepted by her people again, had to be tempting. But he also knew that home for her had become this farm, this life they had built together. What about other mixed families? Mara asked finally. Would you welcome them too, or is this offer just for me? Any orc who wishes to return with a human partner will be welcomed, provided the partnership is genuine and respectful. Shara's expression softened slightly. We have learned that love is not something that should be constrained by species or tradition. We want to build a new future, one where orc and human children can grow up together in peace. It was a beautiful vision, and Kieran wanted to believe in it. But he had learned to be cautious of beautiful visions, especially when they came from people in power. We'll need time to think about it, he said, speaking for the first time. This is a big decision and it affects all of us. Shara nodded. I will return in the spring when the snows melt. You can give me your answer then. She turned to go, then paused. For what it matters, Mara, I am sorry. Sorry for the pain the council caused you. Sorry that you had to face exile and hardship because you loved your daughter too much to give her up. You were right and we were wrong. I hope you can forgive us enough to come home. She left as quietly as she had come, her figure disappearing into the snow until Kieran could not tell her apart from the landscape. He and Mara stood in silence for a while, then went inside where Kessa was reading by the fire. That night, they talked about Shara's offer. Kessa was excited at the idea of meeting other orc children, learning about her heritage. Mara was torn between hope and suspicion, wanting to believe but afraid to trust. And Kieran found himself thinking about what it would mean to leave the farm he had built, the home he had created. What do you want? Mara asked him as they lay in bed, her head on his chest. I want you to be happy, he said honestly. I want Kessa to grow up knowing both sides of her heritage. I want us to be safe and accepted. If going to your clan can give us that, then I'm willing to try. But, she raised her head to look at him, reading the hesitation in his voice. But this is our home. We built this together, fought for it, made it ours. I don't want to lose that. He stroked her hair, the gesture soothing for both of them. And I worry about what it will be like, living among orcs who may accept me on the surface but resent me underneath. Being the only human in an orc clan sounds lonely. You wouldn't be the only human. Mara's voice was soft but certain. Shara said they would welcome other mixed families, and even if you were the only one, you would have me, always. I know. He kissed her forehead, breathing in the scent of her. Let's sleep on it. We have until spring to decide. But as winter deepened and the snow piled higher, Kieran found his answer. It came not in a single moment of revelation, but in 1,000 small ones. Watching Kessa play in the snow, her laughter bright and free. Sitting by the fire with Mara, her hand in his, talking about nothing and everything. Waking up each morning in the home they had built together, surrounded by the life they had created. This was where they belonged. Not because it was easy, but because it was theirs. They had fought for this place, bled for it, loved in it. And while the offer to join Mara's clan was generous and well-meant, Kieran knew in his bones that running to someone else's protection would mean giving up the independence and strength they had forged together. When spring came and Shara returned as promised, Mara told her their decision. They would stay on the farm, continue building their life on the frontier. But they would welcome any orc families who wanted to settle nearby, would work to build a true mixed community where humans and orcs lived side by side as neighbors and friends. Shara looked disappointed, but not surprised. The offer stands, she said. If you ever change your minds, the Red Rock clan will welcome you, and I will send word to other exiles that there is a place here where they might find acceptance. True to her word, over the following year, 3 more mixed families settled within a day's ride of Kieran's farm. A human woman married to an orc man, with 2 small half-orc children. An orc woman and her human wife, both former soldiers who had met during the war. a widowed orc father with 3 teenage sons who had nowhere else to go. Together, they formed a small community, helping each other with harvests and building projects, watching each other's children, defending each other from those who would do them harm. The town of Miller's Ford never fully accepted them, but they could not deny the economic benefits of having hardworking orc farmers contributing to the local market. Eventually, a grudging tolerance developed, and while there were still those like Marcus who harbored hatred, they were outnumbered by those who were willing to live and let live. 2 years after Mara had tugged on Kieran's sleeve in the rain, they stood together watching Kessa play with the other children of their community, a mix of humans, orcs, and half-orcs chasing each other through the spring grass, without a care for what color skin or tusks anyone had. Mara's hand rested on her swollen belly, 7 months pregnant with their first child together, and Kieran had his arm around her waist, supporting her weight. "Are you happy?" he asked, the question that had become a ritual between them. "So happy I can barely stand it," she answered, her smile bright enough to rival the sun. "You?" "Happier than I ever thought I deserved to be." He kissed her temple, gentle and reverent. "Thank you for tugging on my sleeve that night. Thank you for trusting me enough to let me help." "Thank you for grabbing your coat," she countered. "Thank you for being the kind of man who would run into a storm for strangers, who would defend his family against anyone and everyone, who would love me even when the whole world said you shouldn't." "Loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done," he said honestly. "Everything else is just details." They stood there watching their daughter play, feeling their unborn child move beneath Mara's skin, surrounded by the community they had helped create and the home they had fought to keep. The road had been hard, and there would undoubtedly be more challenges ahead. But they would face them together, as they faced everything, with courage and love and the absolute certainty that they belonged to each other. In the distance, thunder rumbled, promising rain. But Kieran just smiled and held his wife closer, unafraid of storms. After all, the last one had brought him his family. Whatever the next one brought, he knew they would weather it together, and that was enough. The seasons continued their eternal dance, and with each passing year, the small community grew stronger and more established. By the time Kessa turned 10, she had more siblings than she had ever imagined. Not just the baby brother Mara and Kieran had brought into the world, but the children of all the families who had settled nearby. She grew up bilingual, speaking both human common tongue and Orcish with equal fluency, moving between cultures with the ease of a child who belonged to both and neither. Kieran's son, whom they named Kellen, was a sturdy boy with his father's brown hair and his mother's green-tinted skin, a perfect blend of both worlds. Watching him learn to walk, to talk, to grow into his own person, Kieran felt a joy so profound it sometimes brought tears to his eyes. This child would never have to choose between his parents' peoples. He would grow up knowing he was both human and orc, that there was no contradiction in that identity. The farm prospered beyond Kieran's initial dreams. With help from their neighbors, they expanded the fields and built better barns. The orc families brought knowledge of crops that grew well in harsh conditions, while the human families shared preservation techniques and trading connections. Together, they created something more successful than either group could have managed alone, a living testament to what cooperation across species could achieve. Not everything was easy. There were still incidents, still moments when prejudice reared its ugly head. A merchant from town who refused to trade with orcs, forcing the community to take their business elsewhere. A group of young humans who threw rocks at the half-orc children playing near the creek. An incident that resulted in Kieran and several other parents having a very direct conversation with the boys' families. A human family who moved to the area specifically to cause trouble, spreading rumors, and trying to turn people against the mixed community, before being driven off by the united front, their targets presented. But for every incident of hatred, there were a dozen moments of grace. The human widow from town who started buying orc-made baskets because they were the best quality she could find, and who eventually became friends with the orc woman who made them. The doctor who rode out from Miller's Ford to deliver Mara's second baby without asking questions or passing judgment. The merchant who started specifically seeking out goods from the mixed community because he could sell them in the cities as exotic frontier crafts. Change happened slowly, grudgingly, but it happened. On Kieran's 48th birthday, Mara organized a celebration that brought together not just their small community, but several families from town who had become genuine friends over the years. It was a warm summer evening, perfect for gathering outside, and the yard was filled with the sounds of laughter and conversation, children playing and adults sharing food and stories. Kieran stood on the porch of the house he had built, expanded now to accommodate their growing family, and looked out at the gathered crowd. Humans and orcs, adults and children, all mingling together without hesitation or fear. This was what he had fought for, what he and Mara had risked everything to create. Not just tolerance, but genuine community. Not just coexistence, but friendship and love. "Happy birthday, old man," Mara said, coming up behind him and wrapping her arms around his waist. At 33, she was in her prime, strong and beautiful and more confident than she had been when they first met. Motherhood and peace had given her a softness that complemented her warrior's strength, making her even more captivating to Kieran than she had been on that first rain-soaked night. "I'm not that old," he protested, turning in her arms to face her. "I've got good years left in me yet." "Prove it," she challenged, her eyes sparkling with mischief and love in equal measure. He kissed her thoroughly, aware that several of their guests were watching and not caring even a little bit. Let them see. Let everyone see how much he loved this woman, how proud he was to call her his wife. Let it be a reminder that love did not care about species or tradition, or what anyone else thought was proper. When they finally broke apart, there was a smattering of applause from their audience, and Kieran laughed, pulling Mara close against his side. "Speech." Someone called out, one of the human neighbors who had become a close friend. "I'm not much for speeches," Kieran started, but Mara elbowed him gently and he relented. All right, I'll keep it short." He looked out at the assembled faces, seeing the future in the children and the present in the adults, all of them part of something larger than themselves. 6 years ago, a little orc girl knocked on my door in the middle of a storm and asked me to help find her mother. I grabbed my coat and went out into the rain, not knowing that I was about to find my family, my purpose, my home. Everything good in my life stems from that moment, from the choice to help someone in need without thinking about species or prejudice or what anyone else would think. He paused, gathering his thoughts. "We've built something special here, not just farms or houses, but a real community where people are judged by their character and their actions, not the color of their skin or the shape of their teeth. It hasn't been easy, and I'm sure there will be more challenges ahead. But as long as we stand together, as long as we refuse to let hate and fear dictate our choices, I believe we can build a future worth living in, a future our children can be proud of." He raised his cup and everyone else did the same. "To family, however we define it, to community wherever we find it, to love which conquers all, to love," the crowd echoed, and the words seemed to shimmer in the summer air, a promise and a prayer. The party continued late into the night, fireflies dancing over the yard as the stars came out overhead. Kieran danced with Mara, swaying slowly to music. Someone was playing on a fiddle, and felt complete in a way he had never imagined possible when he was younger. "You ever regret it?" Mara asked quietly, her head resting on his shoulder. "Giving up the chance for an easier life, one where you weren't married to an orc and facing prejudice at every turn?" "Never," he said without hesitation. "You and Kessa and Kellen, this community, this life we've built together, this is everything I could have wanted and more. I wouldn't trade it for anything." "Good." She tilted her head back to look at him, her eyes serious despite her smile. "Because you're stuck with me now for the rest of our lives." "I certainly hope so," he murmured, and kissed her again as the fireflies danced around them and their friends and family celebrated life and love, and the small miracles that happened when people chose compassion over fear. Years continued to pass, and the community that had started with one desperate child and one man who chose to help grew into a proper settlement. They built a school where children of all species learned together, taught by both human and orc teachers. They established a trading post that became a neutral ground where humans and orcs could do business without the prejudices that still plagued the larger towns. They even attracted a few dwarven families, and one very confused elf trader who decided he liked the frontier better than the ancient forests of his homeland. Kieran's hair turned gray, and Mara's skin developed the fine lines that came with age and laughter. Kessa grew into a formidable young woman, inheriting her mother's strength and her father's compassion, and eventually married a half-orc carpenter from one of the other families. Kellen showed signs of becoming a talented healer, learning medicine from the doctor in town who had long since become a friend to the whole community. Through it all, Kieran and Mara remained the heart of the settlement, the example that everyone looked to when times were hard or when prejudice threatened to creep back in. They had proven that love could transcend difference, that family was built through choice and commitment rather than blood and tradition, that a better world was possible if people were willing to work for it. On their 10th anniversary, Kieran took Mara back to the spot by the creek where he had proposed, the water running just as fast and clear as it had that evening so long ago. They were both older now, their bodies marked by time and hard work, and the beautiful exhaustion that came from raising children and building a life together. But when Kieran looked at Mara, he saw the same woman he had fallen in love with, strong and fierce and tender all at once. "Thank you," he said simply, "for saying yes, for building this life with me, for being my partner in everything." "Thank you for asking," she replied, taking his hand, "for seeing me as a person worthy of love instead of a monster to be feared. For giving Kessa and me a home when we had nowhere else to go. For being the kind of man who grabs his coat and runs into storms." They stood together by the creek as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose just as it had on that long-ago evening. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of their community, their family, the life they had built together through courage and love and sheer stubborn determination. "If you could go back," Mara asked, a question she had never posed before, "and tell your younger self what was coming, what would you say?" Kieran thought about it, really thought about it. He thought about the prejudice and the threats, the barn burning and the hateful words. He thought about the hard work and the sleepless nights, and the constant vigilance required to keep his family safe. He thought about every difficulty and challenge they had faced. And then he thought about Kessa's laugh, and Kellen's first steps, and the feeling of waking up every morning with Mara beside him. He thought about the community they had built, and the lives they had changed. He thought about the future their children would inherit, one where love between species was not forbidden but celebrated. "I would tell him to grab his coat faster," he said with a smile. because the best thing that ever happened to him was waiting in the rain, and every moment of delay was a moment wasted. Mara laughed, the sound bright and joyous, and pulled him into a kiss that still made his heart race even after 10 years of marriage. And as they stood there by the creek, surrounded by the land they had made their own and the life they had built together, Kieran knew with absolute certainty that he had made the right choice all those years ago. He had grabbed his coat and run into the storm, and he had found his home. The years rolled on like the seasons, inevitable and beautiful in their progression. The settlement that had begun as a handful of outcasts and dreamers grew into a thriving town, officially recognized by the territorial governor as New Haven, a place where humans and orcs lived in unprecedented harmony. It became a model, a place that other communities looked to when they wanted to believe that peace between the species was possible. Kieran and Mara aged gracefully together, their love deepening with each passing year. They watched Kessa have children of her own, beautiful grandchildren who called Kieran Grandpa and Mara Nana, without seeing anything unusual about their mixed heritage. They watched Kellen become the town's official healer, respected by humans and orcs alike for his skill and compassion. On their 20th anniversary, the town threw them a celebration, honoring them not just as a couple but as the founders of something larger than themselves. The mayor, a half-orc woman who had been born in New Haven and never known a world where humans and orcs could not love each other, gave a speech about how Kieran and Mara's courage had made possible the lives of everyone in the town. 20 years ago, she said, her voice carrying across the crowded square, one man chose compassion over prejudice, love over fear. He grabbed his coat and ran into a storm to save a stranger, and in doing so, he saved all of us. He showed us that a different future was possible, that we didn't have to be bound by the hatreds and divisions of the past. Kieran and Mara Foster are proof that love is stronger than prejudice, that family is what we make it, and that courage is sometimes as simple as choosing to help someone in need. The crowd erupted in applause, and Kieran felt tears sting his eyes as Mara squeezed his hand. They stood together and accepted the town's gratitude, humbled and honored and grateful beyond words. That night, lying in bed with Mara curled against his side as she had been for 20 years, Kieran thought about that rain-soaked evening when everything had changed. He thought about the small green hand tugging on his sleeve, the desperate voice asking for help, the choice that had seemed so simple in the moment, but that had changed the course of his entire life. "I love you," he whispered into Mara's hair, the words he said every night but that never lost their meaning. "I love you too," she murmured back, drowsy and content. "Thank you for grabbing your coat." "Thank you for knocking on my door," he replied, and felt her smile against his chest. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that they had built something lasting and good. A family, a community, a future where their children and grandchildren could live without the fears and prejudices that had shaped their own lives. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. But Kieran was not worried. He had weathered storms before, and he would weather whatever came next, with Mara by his side and their family surrounding them. They had proven that love could conquer prejudice, that courage could change the world, and that sometimes the most heroic thing a person could do was simply choose to help someone in need. 20 years after a little orc girl had tugged on his sleeve and said her mother had not come home, Kieran Foster lay in bed with his wife and smiled, knowing that he had found his home in the most unexpected place, with the most extraordinary woman, and that he would spend the rest of his life being grateful for the storm that had brought them together. He had grabbed his coat and found his destiny, and it had been worth every moment of the journey.